Mr. President, we are coming to the July 4th weekend. In my state and throughout this country, many people are going to be getting into their automobiles. They're going to be traveling. And in general, people who live in rural states like Vermont don't have the option of getting on a subway, don't have the option of getting on a bus to get to work. They use their automobile. And in Vermont and all across this country, people who are driving have noticed that the price of gasoline at the pump has soared and is today much higher than it used to be. According to the Energy Information Administration, the national average retail price for regular unleaded gasoline is $3.70 a gallon, the highest price for this time of year since 2008. According to the AAA, drivers in 3 states have paid over $4 a gallon at the pump for more than a month, and that's Hawaii, California, and Alaska. In my home state of Vermont, the current average for a gallon of gas is about $3.73 a gallon. Now, when the price of gasoline goes up, a lot of people get hurt, the economy gets impacted. But mostly it affects working people who have no other option but traveling by car, and many of these workers are making $10, $12, $15 an hour. Many of these workers have seen declines in their wages in recent years. And yet, in order to get to work, to make a living, they have to get in their car, and they have no choice but to pay soaring gas prices. Now, while gas prices are soaring, people should not be shocked or will not be shocked to know that the big oil companies, which have racked up $1.2 trillion in profits since 2001, well, now they're telling us that the reason that gas prices are going up is because of the volatile situation in Iraq. And that's why suddenly gas prices have gone up, because of the conflict in Iraq. Well, you know, Mr. President, the American people are sick and tired of hearing from the big oil companies using every excuse they possibly can. If it's snowing, the price of gas goes up. Conflict in the Middle East, the price of gas goes up. If it's raining, if it's sunny, if it's somebody's birthday, the price of gas goes up. Interestingly enough, we don't see that same logic when the price of gas should be going down, but it always seems to be going up. Mr. President, meanwhile, the 5 biggest oil companies in America, again, not too surprisingly, continue to make huge profits. During the first quarter of this year, ExxonMobil made a profit of $9.1 billion, first quarter. Shell made $7.3 billion, Chevron made $4.5 billion, and ConocoPhillips made $2.1 billion. Price of gas at the pump soars. The major oil companies make huge profits. Last year, these 5 major oil companies, ExxonMobil, Shell, Chevron, ConocoPhillips, made $93 billion in profits. ExxonMobil alone made nearly $33 billion in profits in 2013. So in the state of Vermont, all over this country, working people are seeing, in many cases, declines in their wages. They have to get to work. Price of oil, price of gas soars, and the oil companies make. Mr. President, and here's the interesting point. When I was in high school, and I suspect kids all over the country are still being taught this, there is a theory called supply and demand. And what supply and demand is about is when there's a lot of supply and limited demand, prices go down. When there's limited supply and a lot of demand, prices go up. Well, guess what? To nobody's surprise, that is not the way it works in the oil industry. Today, there is more supply and less demand for gasoline than there was 5 years ago, when the average price of a gallon of gas was just $2.69 a gallon. So let me repeat that. more supply, less demand, and today the price of a gallon of gas is $3.70 a gallon. 5 years ago, it was $2.69 a gallon. Where is the logic of supply and demand? Where is that process? Mr. President, according to the EIA, there has been a 9 million barrel increase in the supply of gasoline over the past 5 years. 9 million barrel increase. Since 2009, the U.S. has increased gasoline supplies by 4.3%. Supply has gone up. What about demand? According to the EIA, the U.S. is consuming 96,000 fewer barrels of gasoline than it did in 2009, a 1% drop in demand compared to 5 years ago. If the supply and demand theory were true, gasoline prices should be a bit lower than they were 5 years ago, somewhere perhaps in the neighborhood of $2.69 a gallon. Instead, despite the increase in supply, despite the lowering of demand, the average price for a gallon of gas in the United States has gone up by nearly 38% over the last 5 years, from $2.69 a gallon to $3.70 a gallon. Let me repeat. Since 2009, the supply of gasoline has gone up by more than 4%. Demand for gasoline has gone down by 1%, yet prices at the pump are up by nearly 38%. So people talking about we need more oil, we need more gas, it doesn't matter. Supply up, demand down, prices of gas at the pump soaring. Mr. President, the truth of the matter is that high gasoline prices have less to do with supply and demand and more to do with Wall Street speculators driving prices up in the energy futures market. Over a decade ago, speculators only controlled about 30 to 40% of the oil futures market. Today, Wall Street speculators control about 80% of this market. Let me repeat. Wall Street speculators control about 80% of the oil futures market, even though many of them will never use a drop of the oil. People kind of think that when people own oil on the oil futures market, they actually own it because they're going to use it. Maybe it's the airline industry. Maybe it's the trucking industry. Maybe it's oil fuel dealers. Wrong. The oil futures market is controlled by speculators who never use the end product, whose only goal in life is to drive prices up to make a huge profit, and that is exactly what they do. Mr. President, we as the elected officials of this country, who are presumably representing working families around America, have a responsibility to do everything that we can to make sure that the price of gasoline at the pump is based on the fundamentals of supply and demand and not Wall Street greed. And that is why I am introducing legislation today to require the Commodities Futures Trading Commission to use all of its authority, including its emergency powers, to eliminate excessive oil speculation. This bill is being co-sponsored by Senators Levin, Nelson, Blumenthal, McCaskill, Franken, Brown, Cardin, Baldwin, Whitehouse, Markey, Klobuchar, Shaheen, Merkley, and Hirono. Congresswoman Rosa DeLauro is introducing the companion bill in the House, and I thank all of these members for their support. Our legislation, the Energy Markets Emergency Act, is virtually identical to bipartisan legislation that overwhelmingly passed the House of Representatives by a vote of 402 to 19 during a similar crisis in June of 2008. Specifically, our bill directs the CFTC to do the following within 14 days of enactment. 1, immediately curb the role of excessive speculation in any contract market within the jurisdiction and control of the Commodity Futures Trading Commission on or through which energy futures or swaps are traded. 2, eliminate excessive speculation, price distortion, sudden or unreasonable fluctuations, or unwarranted changes in price or other unlawful activity that is causing major market disturbances that prevent gasoline and oil prices from accurately reflecting the forces of supply and demand. Mr. President, there is now a growing consensus. This is not just the opinion of Bernie Sanders. There is a growing consensus that excessive speculation on the oil futures market is significantly contributing to the high prices that the American people are seeing at the pump. ExxonMobil, Goldman Sachs, the IMF, the St. Louis Federal Reserve, the American Trucking Association, Delta Airlines, the Petroleum Marketers Association of America, the New England Fuel Institute, the Consumer Federation of America, and many other organizations have all agreed that excessive oil speculation has significantly increased oil and gas prices. Just a few years ago, Goldman Sachs, perhaps the largest speculator on Wall Street, came out with a report indicating that excessive oil speculation is costing Americans 56 cents a gallon at the pump. 56 cents a gallon. I personally think that that is a conservative estimate, but it is interesting that it comes from Goldman Sachs itself. The CEO, and this is, what can we say, the CEO of ExxonMobil has testified in the past that he believes excessive speculation has contributed as much as 40% to the price of a barrel of oil. So what you're hearing is some of the Wall Street people in a moment, a rare moment of honesty, acknowledging the impact of speculation. You're hearing the head of the largest oil company in America acknowledging the impact of speculation on gas prices. I think we don't need a whole lot of evidence to suggest that this is a serious problem. Mr. President, 3 years ago, my office obtained confidential information about how much Wall Street speculators were trading in the oil futures market on just one day, and that day was June 30th, 2008, when the price of oil was over $140 a barrel and gas prices were over $4 a gallon. Here's what some of the biggest oil speculators were doing back then on just one day of trading. June 30th, 2008. This goes on every day, one day. Goldman Sachs bought and sold over 863 million barrels of oil. Morgan Stanley bought and sold over 632 million barrels of oil. Bank of America bought and sold over 112 million barrels of oil. Lehman Brothers, obviously now bankrupt, bought and sold over 300 million barrels of oil. Merrill Lynch, bought by Bank of America, bought and sold over 240 million barrels of oil. Mr. President, the only reason that these firms were betting on the price of oil was to speculate and to make money. Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, they do not use oil. Their only function in this process is speculation, driving up prices, and making huge profits. Mr. President, the rise in oil and gasoline prices were entirely avoidable. The Dodd-Frank Wall Street Reform and Consumer Protection Act required the CFTC to impose strict limits on the amount of oil that Wall Street speculators could trade in the energy futures market by January 17th of 2011, over 3.5 years ago. Unfortunately, the CFTC has been unable to implement position limits due to opposition from Wall Street and a ruling by the D.C. Circuit Court. This is simply unacceptable. Millions and millions of Americans who are filling up at the gas tanks today are disgusted. They know they're being ripped off, and they want us to protect their needs. Mr. President, the time is now to provide the American people relief at the gas pump before the situation gets even worse. I urge my colleagues to co-sponsor this legislation. And with that, Mr. President, I yield the floor.